Welcome to the Blow Mold Hospital. Today I've got an interesting project, and it's not him. This guy is actually in pretty good shape. He has a few glue issues here. Some glue got on him when he was being manufactured, I'm guessing. Same way over here along the edges. A little deteriorated and yellowed, but for the most part this one's in really good shape. This is an old Union Santa Claus. Really nice. This is the one that I'm starting to restore. As you can see, he has some sun damage. Very yellowed, and you can tell that the red is fading there. He's probably sat in the window for years, and he's just faded. On the back you can see the original red, but as you turn him around he's faded there. So I'll be fixing that eventually, but first I've got a couple of problems with this guy. So the light fixture goes in here, and somebody had let it fall down inside, and as you can see it burned a hole into the boot. A little bit lucky, because if it was in the red it'd be a little bit more difficult, but since it's black I'll be able to repair that. But that's one issue there. I cleaned out the hole here a little bit where it was a little like thin, rough edges, so I kind of smoothed that out a little bit. And I'm not going to take out this whole bump here. I'm going to leave it because I don't want to compromise it any further by taking the rest of that plastic out. So I'm going to just live with that bump, but I'll be fixing that hole. And then the other piece, it was probably dropped or something, and the boot is cracked. So I'll be taking some steps to try to repair that. It may turn out well, may not. But let's get started. So one of the first things that I've done here is I've taken a piece of milk jug and I've cut it just a little bit larger than the hole. And I'm using kind of the textured kind that will hopefully grab the glue just a little bit better. And then I cut a hole in the middle and tied some fishing string to. So how I'm going to attack this is I'm going to drop this piece into here and then kind of hold it into place like that. That will give me a base to start applying the epoxy, and then as the plastic there sticks I will be able to cut the string off at the base there, and then again just use that to smooth over the top. I want to apply a tripod here to kind of hold this plastic in place so that while it's drying it'll have tension on it. I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got the string in there, I've got the plastic piece kind of in place, and I'm just using a camera tripod and attaching the fishing string to it to pull this tight here. So it gives me a good base to work from and kind of an extra set of hands to hold the string in place while I work on this. So next up is getting my epoxy ready. Give me a few minutes, I'll be right back. Alright, so I've mixed up a little bit of epoxy, not a ton, because I don't want to get too heavy just yet. I want to kind of glue the plastic in place. I'm just kind of pulling it back underneath the hole to where it'll run down and attach to the plastic piece that I inserted, because I want a good solid base to be able to go back in and fill in the big piece, the big part, once it's glued, and I have a base to glue it to. Otherwise I worry that it'll just kind of fall out until it's dried with a little bit of glue. It was a little bit more than I wanted. I actually think I probably just filled the whole thing. But so far it's holding better than I thought it would, so I'm not going to be too worried about it. I'm going to go ahead and Just put an extra bit in there. Okay. So that's it. Filled it with some epoxy with the plastic behind it. I'll let this dry for several hours and then I'll come back and show you what my next step is. You're wondering what kind of glue I use. Still use my Gorilla Glue Epoxy Clear. It's designed for sticking to plastic and amongst other things. But this is what I use. Been using it for a while. Alright, that first coat is settled in and started to dry pretty good. It's not fully dry, but it has sealed and filled into all of the gaps between the plastic milk carton and the blow mold itself. So I'm just coming back in with a little bit more to fill in the gap a little bit deeper. Now that the base is in place, this won't go running out underneath to fill the gaps. And now I'm building up between the plastic and the edge of the blow mold to try to get as close to the original. Again, knowing that the bulb made this outdent in the leg here, so I've already admitted that that won't fill in correctly, or it won't look 100% just because of the way that the bulb burnt it, but I didn't want to get rid of that particular part of it because I didn't want to cut out too much of the blow mold. And I want a little bit of the glue to go on the outside, kind of spread over the top of the blow mold, because I'm kind of sandwiching the epoxy underneath it, being held in place by the milk jug, and then coming on the outside a little bit. So the epoxy's a little over on the inside and a little over on the outside, just to, again, put that sandwich in there to make it a little bit stronger, have a little bit more thickness to it. Okay, I'll let that group dry as well. Alright, it's about a half hour later and it's mostly dry, a little bit tacky, but definitely strong here. So I'm going to attempt to cut the fishing string off at the base here. Alright, so let's take a look. You can see that I've still got a little bit of a gap here, but for the most part it's starting to fill in and cover that hole. Again, makes me a little sad that I didn't cut that out of there, but I didn't want to get at the structure of this. So it's starting to fill in nicely. It's very smooth. The epoxy sticks on there quite well. It's strong. And that string is barely visible, and once I put another coat on there, it'll disappear what's left there. Alright, let me do a little bit more. The secret is building up several small layers, so I think this will probably be the last one that I do for this hole, and then I will start working on the foot. Alright, I'm going to let that one dry. Probably is going to be the last layer. Let that last coat dry. While not perfect, it's pretty good. Nice and smooth. Still a little tacky, you can see my fingerprint in there, but for the most part, it's nice and smooth again, ready to be colored once it dries fully. Okay, so now on to this one. Okay, to go off the way I did the first one here, I've attached another piece of plastic to a fishing string. This one's bent because I have the flat side on this side, and then there's a little bit on the bottom that I want to build up. So let's see if we can make this thing work. I'm going to have to do a little finagling, so I'll be back in a minute. These layers, but I'm just doing some quick small layers to build up on top of each other. Alright, so I'm back. It's fairly dry. I went ahead and filled in that hole that was still there, so it's fairly smooth. You can see I've been doing a little bit of sanding on it, but I'm getting ready to get a little aggressive. I also felt a little bad about this dimple here, so I put a little bit more epoxy in here. I'm going to sand this down, but to try to hide that little dimple a little bit more, so it'll look more hopefully like that. It won't be exact, but just wanted to show that a little bit more. So the glue, or the sandpaper I'm using, some 3M wet dry 600 grit, and then eventually I'll get over to some I can't tell here, but some 2000 grit. So I'm just trying to remove a little bit more aggressively with the 600 grit the glue that went over, and you know, it's not exactly perfect or smooth. And I'm not really worried about that I'm cutting some of the paint off, because when I repaint this, it'll be fine. I'm not worried about taking any of the original paint off at all. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just making sure that that glue is smooth, and that any of the pieces like this area here where it's a little rough around through there, that gets sanded down so that that boot looks like looks a little more filled in and a little more smooth. So rather than me sit here and sand this for a while, I'll do that. I'll be back and I'll show you the finished sanding. It, or at least as much as I'm going to sand it. It's fairly smooth, not great, but it's better than it was. It was better than it having a big hole in it. And back here I did very little. I just sanded this where the glue kind of ran over a little bit. Didn't touch this too much. This actually looked pretty good. And then I just feathered that out. Probably spend a little bit more time on that. But for the most part, I have filled these holes in with the epoxy. And yes, I know I've taken the paint off here, but again, there was a giant hole here and a giant hole here, so there's not. So join me in a little bit. Soon I'll have another video up on how to paint this, and I'm going to put air quotes around painting, but you'll see my process for doing this. But overall, I'm pleased. Little rough, but again, better than 2 holes in this thing. But thanks for joining me on the Blow Mold Hospital. And thanks for taking a look.